welcome to episode 158 of The Route. The Route is a glorified coffee chat and podcast forum that takes you from A to B with a new guest every episode. As always, I'm your host, Christopher Nascimento, and let's get started. Before we begin today, just a couple of things to cover. First off, if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast, follow the podcast, whatever platform you're listening on. Just allows us to grow a bit sooner. You can rate 5 stars, like it as well. That's all good stuff. So we're available on YouTube. You can find us there at the Routecast or any podcasting platform that you can think of, from Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon. I'm missing, I think, 6 others, but we're everywhere that you can find a podcast. So check us out there, engage with us, and it allows us to grow a little bit easier. And on that as well, if you haven't already, subscribe to us on social media, follow us there. That's also at the Routecast. If you're watching on YouTube, you can just see at the top hand corner our username there. And then that's where you could find us on all the traditional platforms. But the one that's most special for this podcast is LinkedIn, just in regards to the content we're discussing. It's great to connect with us there. You'll see a new episode release every Tuesday. You'll get the little spark notes on who the guest is, what they're about, and where you can find it. And then you can kind of engage whether with myself, the guest, people that are also interested in that topic, and you can either grow, maintain, or start your network. It's always good to start doing that. Check us out there at the Routecast on all podcasting platforms as well. But with that now said, we can get into today's guest. Today's guest is brought to you by Zoom. In the world of partnerships, there's a simple principle: you adapt or you die. In this fast-paced industry, you can't afford to miss a beat. And that's where Zoom will help you win each and every time. Zoom provides premier real-time data insights for partnerships across broadcast, streaming, and social like no one else. They're always ready, and detailed analytics help you get the upper hand and save time in your day-to-day reporting. So if you're ready to upgrade your reporting today, make the smart choice and choose Zoom. With that, today's guest. I'd now like to welcome someone who has a wealth of experience in marketing and the promotional space. Someone who has climbed the ranks within the current company they're at, from brand coordinator to being now the director of marketing and innovation at Bâton Rouge. Maria Frank, welcome to The Route. How's it going?
Hi, I'm good. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Thank you. I guess the way the name of the podcast says, The Route. Do you mind maybe taking us through yours?
Yeah, for sure. Well, firstly, you did a really good job at going through my titles. Those are 100% accurate. There was a few in between, but those are definitely the most notable ones from beginning to where I'm currently at. So I've been with Bâton Rouge, which is part of the MTY group, for a little over 10 years, which is really crazy to say because 10 years is a long time. And like you mentioned, I started off as brand coordinator, quickly moved my way into marketing about a year and a half into the position, got promoted a few times within that sphere. And then finally, where I'm at and where I've been for the last 5 years is marketing director of the brand of Bâton Rouge.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool just to hear about that. I'm excited to kind of get into it a bit further from there. And I guess prior to joining Bâton Rouge, maybe let's go back in time and then we'll work our way to where we are now. I typically like to ask people, because I find it's pretty unique, about, let's say, university for them, right? So did you have any, maybe, let's say, issues in selecting which program, which major you wanted to go in? Because I find a lot of our guests, they say, hey, I'm going to go into law. And then maybe a couple years in, maybe following school, they're like, nope, not for me. Did that circumstance happen for you?
Yeah, and it's funny that you say law because that was pretty much it. So for university, I did my undergrad at McGill in Montreal. I majored in history. I minored in political science. After completing that, I went on and started doing a law certificate, a law program at a French university, University of Montreal. I completed that while simultaneously working at a law firm, which was great because I was getting the school experience, educational experience, along with the actual practical work experience. And there I was doing things, I was essentially kind of like a paralegal, a legal assistant. So I was able to get my hands on, legal documents. I was able to touch a little bit of different parts of law from corporate to family. So it was a really nice way to get exposed to that whole world. But I had a change of heart. It didn't feel like it was for me. And I decided to go back to school. And I I went back to McGill actually in a graduate studies program in marketing and management. And funny enough, I don't know if you want to call it serendipity, but the day that I started my graduate studies at McGill was also the same day that I started working at Bâton Rouge or for Bâton Rouge as a brand coordinator. And it was funny because once again, I was sort of getting like the practical experience, getting my hands on actual work while studying at the same time. And, slowly, I guess the fact that I was exposed to marketing within my role as brand coordinator, and I was also studying it at McGill, the stars started aligning, and gradually I moved into marketing, like I mentioned earlier, about a year and a half in. And then I guess if you want to say the rest is history.
Yeah, that's very cool how that kind of took place. And I guess going back to your time when you wanted to get into the law field, right? Was there any particular moment or experience that was like, oh, this isn't for me?
Um, yeah, I guess there was a few moments. I always considered myself a creative person. A long time ago, I actually wanted to be a magazine editor. That was kind of my dream job growing up. That was after I realized that being a model would be really tough work. So I thought magazine editor would be the next best thing. And then I don't know, I guess like a lot of people, we kind of fall in love with the idea of things. And I fell in love with the idea of law, but I never actually wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a notary, which in Quebec is a little bit different than the rest of Canada. But that was kind of the route that I was on. And I actually worked at two law firms during my time as I was working within the law world. And I think it was just the fact that it was like countless contracts. Contracts were so faceless. Just reading them, there was no source of creativity. People at the office, there was no opportunity to like brainstorm. I mean, the law is the law. You have to obviously abide by the law, and you have to do so even more in a contractual sense or in a legal sense. So there was zero room for creativity. I think that was one of my turning points that I realized. And I don't know, it didn't sit well with me to continue this as a career. I like the title, admittedly, like I think a lot of people do, but I think I realized that it wasn't for me. And also, when I went to University of Montreal to do my law certificate, it was not really a full law degree. It kind of represents a third of a law degree, and a lot of people sort of do this to make sure that they're going down the right path. So it was a nice way to sort of get my feet wet. And I guess along with my work and like what I was saying at the office and what I was seeing and with everything in between, it just sort of all of a sudden just didn't feel like it was the right path for me.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And funny enough, I think one of the whole points that I started this podcast was just to kind of show all the different routes that people go on. But for the most part, it seems like everyone has somewhat of a similar path, at least at the beginning, where there's a big, curve or change or something like that. It's never linear in that sense. And to be honest, just as you're saying it too, I initially started off in accounting. I was like, oh, like it sounds cool. It should be fun. And then as I was in the office, I was like, no, I feel like I'm way too creative. I need to, engage with people as well. And I was like, I can't just be on Excel all day long, right? So I can definitely see where you're coming from for that. And I guess then going back to when you first started your post grad for marketing, right, at McGill, and it so happened to be the same day you started at Bâton Rouge as the brand coordinator. How did that come about? Was it simply maybe applying? Was it through networking? And yeah, maybe tell us about this like serendipitous moment.
There's actually a really funny story behind that too. So at this point, I was starting my graduate studies program in September, just like when most programs begin in university. And over the summer, I had already made that decision where I was obviously pivoting away from law. So I said to myself, as much as I liked working where I was working at the law firm, at the office, I said to myself, you know what, now it's time to start looking for something that's within what will hopefully be, you know, my field one day, and just sort of figuring it out from there. It's not a really fun moment when you kind of hit a wall and you just feel like you have to figure things out. But anyway, so at that point I started, you know, exploring different things, exploring different industries. And I was also doing part-time kind of event work where I would assist in different events, like for example, for Veuve Clicquot, for Dom Perignon. I had a friend who had like an event staffing company, so I was doing a little bit of that. And it seemed like a really cool idea and a cool space to work in, you know, like the event industry. There's that creative component. It's very project based. You touch on a lot of cool brands. I feel like that was kind of the beginning of, you know, me sort of falling in love with the idea of marketing. So anyway, I found a job posting through my friend who had the event company, and I decided to apply kind of on a whim. Got called for the interview. Um, Loved what they had to tell me. Loved the idea. I remember they sort of sold me on this idea of travel. Anyone who knows me knows how much I love to travel. And I remember one of the things the man who was interviewing me at the time said, like, well, I hope your passport is, you know, readily available and not expired, because there'll be a lot of travel in this work. So when I heard that, I got super excited. Long story short, they made me the job offer. I got the job. I obviously accepted. And I obviously gave my 2-week notice at the law firm I was working at. So I was really happy. I remember it was around my birthday. We were celebrating this new direction. Everything just felt really right. Everything kind of felt like serendipitous at that point too. And then one day, I think I had just finished work at the office. I get an email from the person who had interviewed me, the founder, I guess, of this company, his assistant, basically telling me that they have to pull the job offer. And I remember seeing this email and I was obviously shocked, just like anybody would be shocked and disappointed, and obviously feeling a wave of emotions, but also feeling like I can't accept this, because who emails somebody that after knowing that I gave my notice and I was supposed to start working at that job in about a week's time. So I was trying to call the office. I was trying to call the guy who interviewed me. No answer. They were dodging my calls, just sending me emails saying like, no, we have to retract the job offer. There's been a change of plans. The job doesn't stand. So this is when I really felt like I hit a wall, because now I'm pretty much jobless, and I've never been jobless. I've been working part-time since probably the age of 15. And now it's like, okay, I have to start over and figure out where I'm going to work while I'm doing my studies, and so on and so forth. So I told the law firm, I told them the truth. I'm a very honest person. I told them what happened. And I said, listen, I know I give you my notice. If you want, I can stick around. I can help train the new hires. Just want you to know that I'm available. They were actually very accommodating, and they kept me on for a little while, which was great. And then I was on LinkedIn, and I found this job posting for Bâton Rouge brand coordinator. I read the job description. It interested me. And again, like I kind of applied on a whim, not really expecting to get called for an interview, or I just sort of like applied like that. But they obviously called me. I went in for an interview. At this point, I was not getting my hopes high because of what had just happened. I had a little bit of PTSD. So I went for the interview. There was like a test involved in the interview. It was kind of a weird interview, but whatever. I was there for it. And then I got called for a second interview. Went in, did that, and then finally I got a call with a job offer, with a contract that was signed by myself and another party. And then I started working from there.
Wow, such a crazy story how that happens sometimes. And to be honest, I find the application process or even interview process that people kind of go through, where I went through it recently, and then even just I hear the stories that others go through, like, oh wow, it's such almost a mess sometimes when you think about it. And just to hear stories like that, just it's crazy. And I guess going back to now starting at that role as a brand coordinator, your first day of your post grad as well. And I think you touched on it earlier too. Kind of cool too how you're able to almost, sit in, let's say maybe a lecture, they share something, and then you could almost immediately apply it, or maybe at least visualize it within that role. So what was that like when you first started as that brand coordinator, and how were you then able to start getting some steam and evolving within the company?
So my first day, I really didn't know what to expect. It was like my first, I'd say, corporate job, because although I did work in a few law firms, like I mentioned, they weren't really, like a corporate setting. This job felt very corporate. It felt very serious. It felt sort of like very businesswoman like. So I went in like really not knowing what to expect. My first day was weird. I'm not gonna lie. The person who had interviewed me, who was supposed to be the person I would report into, left, and on the day that I started, the new brand VP had also started. So we both kind of looked at each other and were like, okay, well, I guess it's for both of us our first day. So we had to figure that whole dynamic out together, because he wasn't the one who hired me. In the end, he was the one who promoted me a few times, but he wasn't the one who hired me initially. So first day, obviously, just like any other first day, you meet the team, you get acquainted, you start to visualize yourself there. And then you have these moments where you're like, I don't like it, because you feel like you don't fit in, or you feel like it's not what you expected. So it was a wave of emotions on my first day. And I remember thinking to myself, and I'm not even kidding when I say this, that I don't see myself lasting here for more than 3 months. If you ask me why, in a very quick nutshell, I'd say that the company at the time was undergoing some changes, and the dynamics were weird. There were people yelling at each other. There were people yelling on the phone. It felt oddly corporate, but extremely unprofessional, if that makes any sense. So I didn't see myself staying there. But, I guess as the days went by and you feel more and more comfortable, and, you start meeting the team, and you start getting acquainted with them and learning more about them, you start to appreciate little things. And the person that I was reporting into, I actually started really enjoy working with him along with other team members. So that kind of made the experience very different, because although it was like a medium-sized company, my direct team that I was working with, they were really cool people. So the job started to become fun. It started to become less awkward. And when it comes to what I was learning in school at night, because it was night classes, it was a lot of like case studies that we were doing at the time, a lot of ways to apply marketing tactics, public relations. And then I started seeing things like that pop up, not within my job description per se, because I was brand coordinator. I was more operations in that role, but more on the marketing side. So I started just sort of helping out the marketing team, giving them suggestions of things that I would read about or hear about, or we would talk about in class, or discussion points that would come up here and there. And then I obviously started showing a very strong interest on the marketing side of things. So I started doing special projects for marketing as well. And then I guess that's how I started transforming from operations into marketing.
And what does that transition process look like? Is it something where you're completely joining a new team and you're kind of maybe leaving it apart and you have to pick between the two? Or is it more so because it's all the same company, you're able to have, let's say, a fluid role, if that makes sense?
Well, it was within the brand. We were about 10 people in the brand. There was 2 or 3 people in marketing at the time, and then operations had a few more people. But we were all essentially working together. Just everyone had their respective roles and responsibilities. So at the time, I was just sort of working on, just like special projects that they would give me or that I would collaborate with them. I remember one of them was social media, which is so funny because at that time, I mean, it's over 10 years ago. Social media obviously wasn't what it was today. Facebook was a lot more straightforward. There was no paid ads. It was all organic growth. Instagram, I think, was just starting to take off, but it wasn't at all what we know Instagram to be today, like with stories and engagement, and again, like sponsored and paid posts. So I just started sort of working on the social presence of the brand, coming up with the captions, doing the posting, synchronizing all the locations to have their individual pages, just like very simple stuff that anyone who kind of grew up with a little bit of social media throughout their, like college, university years would easily be able to tackle. And then I would touch on anything that was communication based, because my writing skills are quite strong, especially given the fact that my undergrad was in history, poli-sci. We would write a lot. I'd write a lot of papers and essays. So I would help them a lot in that realm. And then it just sort of went from there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess as let's say you're saying as it went on from there, what does that look like? Because I find, or not, I find, I know the numbers of like who listens to the podcast. It's let's say 25 to 45-year-old professionals, right? So people that are either, let's say, maybe getting their second role or getting promoted for the first time, or they have been in the past. What does that process look like? I guess at least for you, was it something where a job became available and you said, "Hey, like I want to throw my hat into that process," or was it, "Hey, Maria, you're qualified. You're the person for us to kind of move forward with"?
Yeah, it was more the latter. Um, but at the same time, I had expressed, I not only was working on the projects, I had expressed interest to my boss that I want to be in marketing. It was very obvious. I would put my hand up for projects, and I was very forthcoming with what I felt and where I wanted to be. But I was obviously not pushy about it. So it was I guess to answer your question, it was a combination of both. My boss seeing something in me, but also myself being vocal about what I liked and where I wanted to go.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess going back to one of the points you touched on, just in regards to, let's say, thinking back to 10 years ago, what social media was like and how maybe, let's say, simplified it was for maybe a brand to kind of manage it. What has that been like just in regards to, like I was thinking about this the other day, just in regards to like AI now, or even like short form content, all the different types of, let's say, streams within a social media platform now. It's almost like a behemoth, right? Just in regards to how many things you need to be on top of. What's that transition process been like where, let's say, 10 years ago you post something on Instagram, you just think about, let's say, the caption for it, maybe the locations, captioning it all, whereas now it's a full blown like entity where you really got to put a lot of time into it.
It's funny that you say that because I was also thinking for some reason about the evolution of social media throughout the years. And yeah, I guess a very easy way to explain that is I remember when I was building on the brand presence on Facebook 10 years ago, just the interface was so straightforward. Like there was no business manager tab. There was just like, settings profile. I guess whoever works within this realm would understand more what I'm trying to get at, but it was just the interface and the dashboard itself was just so simple. Whereas now you log on, or I'll log on and I'll have trouble figuring out where to go, which is insane because when I think about it, I'm like, okay, I was managing this brand from the beginning, and now I have a hard time extracting Facebook invoices to send to accounting. So just that itself, I feel, speaks volumes because there's so many things that go into it now and so many changes, and just, like sponsored posts, and there's zero organic growth versus 10 years ago everything was organic and it was so easy to get followers, to get likes, to get comments, to get basically eyeballs on your brand through social media. And the same thing goes for Instagram back then was just sort of like a picture book. It was a virtual picture book. There was no stories, there was no reels, there was no videos. There was barely anyone even following people or even liking. I mean, I think then getting 5 likes is probably the equivalent of today's, I don't know, 150 likes. So that whole space has completely transformed itself on a personal, but also when you manage a brand, you see the intricacies of it, and it's challenging because there's budget that you need to know how to spend. Back then, putting a budget behind social was so minimal, and you would get so many impressions and so many eyeballs on what you wanted people to see. But now it's like you said, it's a behemoth, and now there's TikTok, that's a whole entity on its own. There's of course LinkedIn, which I love LinkedIn because it's the probably one of the only organic platforms left. So big fan of LinkedIn as well. But yeah, no, I hope that answers your question.
No, it for sure does. And yeah, I think just as you're mentioning it there, even just thinking about all the different, let's say, tools that people use to manage social media or track analytics, set evaluations, or to be honest, even maybe 4 episodes ago, I had a friend of mine come on the podcast and they started a business just for, what is it, short for short form platform. That doesn't make sense. Short form videos for brands. So they made a whole company just regarding, let's say, essentially creating TikTok videos for brands. And obviously, there's so many things that kind of go into where, it's shooting the content, editing the content, or so on and so forth. So it's crazy how much it's evolved from there for sure. And
So
I
much.
guess,
And that, just to your point, short videos, like you got to get it within 6 to 7 seconds, and 6 to 7 seconds, it passes like that. So how do you communicate everything you want to communicate in such a short period of time?
no, absolutely, it's a tricky ball game now, just in regards to how it's almost like a science, right?
Yeah.
Where maybe before is very much, hey, like this is cool or this is something unique, whereas now is, hey, how can I don't want to say trick someone, or how can I convince someone to like keep watching or to keep their attention for this amount of time? So that definitely makes sense. I guess going back to your route specifically again, you're kind of going through the stages of your career when there's so much, things being, introduced, evolving, etc. What does that look like in regards to your career? How does it go from like one stage to the other within the company? Is it something where the scope of your work becomes larger, or the projects you start managing are bigger? What does that transition start looking like from one role to the next within the same company?
So do you mean when I jumped into the director role, or as I was jumping?
I guess like going back from brand coordinator to marketing advisor to marketing manager. What do those different stages look like? I guess for your route.
Well, from brand coordinator to marketing advisor, that was really just switching out from operations and going full on into the marketing world. So
Mhm.
full dedicating, my time to, like I mentioned, social media, communication, also working with franchisees on local store marketing. So basically anything that the franchisees would want to do for their own locations, I would assist them in that. I would help them, create the visuals, decide the best methods of communication, decide the best part of the menu to advertise, basically how to attract new guests and how to engage their local communities. So that was probably the biggest change. And then from marketing advisor to marketing manager, it was more responsibility in the sense that I started helping out a little bit with the budgets. I started touching on the national marketing, because basically the way our marketing department works is that, like I mentioned, we have the local marketing, which is strictly for franchisees and helping them with their own business, with their own Bâton Rouge restaurants, and helping grow their business and attracting sales and traffic specifically to their locations. And then there's the national marketing, which is basically doing marketing for the brand at large. So let's say working on a TV ad, doing the social media for the brand page, doing radio ads for the brand, maybe billboards, just doing those kinds of things. So that was the biggest pivot. So going from helping those franchisees specifically to helping them, but also being able to touch on all the national stuff, and of course the brand strategy, which is always the most interesting because that essentially dictates where the marketing and advertising will go.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then I guess as it comes about for yourself personally, how do you like go about those stages? Is it something where like, hey, I'm ready, or is it something where I remember my first networking event. I went there and I was easily the youngest person, and one of the advice someone gave me was always apply for jobs that you're underqualified for, because then you're going to grow that much more. Was that something that you kind of noticed where, let's say, you just kind of kept pushing the envelope where like, hey, I'm ready for the next challenge, or is it something where you went seeking for it?
Are you saying for when I jumped to
Yeah,
from?
like going from the different roles, did
Okay.
you feel ready to jump into the next
Yeah.
ones when they came about, or was it more so, hey, like there's this challenge, but I'm keen to take it on?
No, I'd say that I felt ready. Um, I think what it was is I enjoyed my job so much. I enjoyed the brand so much. I related to it. I enjoyed the franchisee so much that everything just felt natural. Like it didn't feel forced. I didn't feel forced. I didn't feel like it was, work where you're bored and where you're like sort of forced to do a certain task that you're not crazy about. I genuinely enjoyed everything that the brand had to offer, and including the people that I was also working with. So the jumps, I don't know, they felt natural. They felt like it was the right time. I felt really well supported by everyone around me, including people who were not necessarily in our brand but within the company. So it felt good. Obviously there was a few projects, a few decisions at first, managing the whole national budget. At first, those things seem a little bit scary, but I just felt like I could do it.
Yeah. And do you think that's something because it was almost like a gradual process where, you started at, let's say, the grassroots for the brand and you slowly started, growing your skill sets, evolving in regards to the amount of tasks you would have and what you had your hands within. And then eventually like, oh, you know what? Like it's just slowly kind of coming about and it's a gradual process. Whereas let's say maybe someone came from a different type of business where they weren't, let's say, dealing from a regional level to then a national, that would be almost something that'd be very hard to come by where it'd be hard to, let's say, understand the different intricacies of the different levels, let's say, right? Is that
Yeah.
something that you definitely think, climbing that ladder within the company made you kind of, feel at ease as you were growing within it?
Yeah, I think that was definitely a contributing factor. I'm also the type of person who asks a lot of questions. And I think that helps a lot. Like I don't have an ego in the sense that if I can't do something, if I don't know how to do something, I'm not shy to ask and ask for the help. Um, but definitely growing within the company really helps because at the same time, you're making contacts, you're creating connections, you're forging these important work relationships that will ultimately help with when the time comes for these career pivots and switches. So that for sure, I would say guaranteed helped. But like I said, I mean, the fact that I really enjoyed the brand as much as I did, and I was dedicated and my passion for it and everything, I think that really helped it feel real, authentic, and I just continued being who I was despite the position that I was changing or that I was sort of climbing the ladder. I just kept being real, and I started to also understand, like, slowly when I started having a team report into me, I remember understanding what each of the people on my team would feel because I knew that I was there not too long ago. And it was something that I really sort of kept close to my heart because, there was a few things that, just like everyone, there's a few things that sometimes your boss does that bothers you or upsets you, or you don't feel like you're recognized enough, or you don't feel like your ideas are being pushed by your boss. I remember having all this in my head and sort of pledging to myself and to, like my the people that were reporting to me and the future people that would be reporting to me that I would never want them to feel like that. I would always want them to feel valued. I would always want their ideas to be at the forefront. I would never want to steal someone's idea and say that it was mine. So I think in a way that helped me because it showed that I was a real person with pure intentions, and the people around me, I think at least, just sort of wanted to help me.
Yeah, and to be honest, just as you're saying that, it sounds like a very like cool asset, let's say, to have just in regards to being able to relate to everyone that's maybe on your team because you were very much in their shoes. You know what they're going through. You know what those experiences were like. Where I'm sure it's very advantageous to be having that. And I guess that ultimately got you to where you are now, being the marketing director, right? What does that role look like, if you don't mind sharing with us? Like, what does the day to day look like? What types of things are you working on that you're willing to share? And do you mind maybe taking us through that a bit further?
Yeah, for sure. So the funny thing is, the more you grow into the marketing world and you start, to get promoted to director and let's say above, the less actual marketing stuff and projects you get to touch on. And I always thought that was the funniest and ironic thing because it was that was specifically what made me fall in love with marketing, the whole creative aspect behind it. And basically all your marketing projects become an extension of your brain and your idea, and like you kind of put yourself into it. So that was a big part of what I loved and still love about marketing. But yeah, so the higher you go, it's funny because then you start overseeing the projects and you start overseeing the high level strategy. And there's points where you're just sort of there, like having the ideas presented to you and either approving them or rejecting them. But on a day to day, right now in my current marketing and innovation director role, basically a big part of it goes to managing my team and offering them and being a support. Also, of course, determining the brand strategy. And what I mean by that is, the brand tone. Where will we do our advertising? Will we be on TV? How much of it should we be investing in digital versus traditional marketing? Kind of making those decisions. That's a big component of it. And of course, managing the budget. I think the role of the marketing director, the fact that I'm personally managing the franchisee's money and deciding where to invest their money is probably the most important and crucial role, because it's at the end of the day it's their hard-earned money, and they're trusting me to invest it in the proper channels. And sometimes we all make mistakes, and I've obviously made mistakes, we all have, but I've always said that we need to try new things, because if we don't try new things, then it's detrimental. It could be detrimental to the brand. So like I said, I think that's a big part of the role. And then there's obviously like the fun stuff. If you ask me what I love the most about my role, aside from being able to like be that mentor to the people that report to me, or to whomever in the brand or the company, is playing a direct role in like innovating the menu. And I obviously consider myself a foodie. I don't think I could not be a foodie working for Bâton Rouge for over 10 years. But I work a lot hand in hand with our corporate chef. And not only do we have like a great dynamic and a great working relationship, but it's the most fun when we see an idea, wherever it may be, and have that sort of like light bulb flash, be like, this could be the next huge thing for the brand, or this could be such a great menu addition. And then working through that, and then seeing it come to life on the menu, and then seeing it come to life at the photo shoots or in the TV ad, and seeing it on digital platforms, or seeing it wherever, and then seeing it become a hit, or so we hope, or seeing it not become a hit. But that's very rare. Usually the little innovative tidbits that we find, they usually end up being successes.
Yeah, that's like you never really hear about that, right? How it kind of goes about in regards to a large restaurant or food brand, right? How do the menu items kind of come into play? And I never really thought about it from that angle where, marketing would have maybe a handle on in regards to, what's in versus what's out, and maybe what way you could potentially innovate. There's quite a few things that you mentioned there I wanted to touch on. And I guess the first one is going back to, let's say, that creative element that you said, right? As you're kind of growing, maybe you do less marketing things, I think you were mentioning. So is that something where your opportunity to, let's say, scratch that creative itch is through that approval process when people are presenting things to you? And then maybe rather than just simply approving or rejecting things, then maybe you can chime in with, hey, maybe we should try this, or what do you guys think of this? And that's where you get that, let's say, brainstorming session that you were saying that you didn't really have in that law career.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that, because there are so many points in a meeting, whether it's with our agency or the team or even the operations team or whoever, where ideas will be presented. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, okay, well, do I say something, or do I just sort of like let the idea go and not be the voice of, oh no, I don't think that's a good idea. Like, because sometimes, like I said, people make mistakes, and I think it's important to make mistakes. And being a director in whatever field, I think it's also important that you allow your team to make mistakes sometimes, because that's how they learn, that's how they grow, and that's how the next greatest idea comes about. So it's funny that you asked that question, because it happens to me pretty often. And I can never ignore that voice in my head. When I feel like something's wrong, I feel like I have to say it, and I will say it like 99% of the time. And I will try to offer kind of like the creative avenue without giving necessarily the creative idea away, because like I said, I want the people around me to also have that creative space to be able to freely brainstorm and to freely give ideas, and for us, to obviously listen to them and to go with them. So I kind of, to answer your question, I try to give the avenue or the road, and I kind of give it to them so that they can sort of determine the destination, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. And it's almost like, because I'm sure if you're in one of those meetings and you're constantly just shutting down ideas or saying, no, that's a bad one, do my idea, or X, Y, Z, it kind of would bring down the spirit of, let's say, the people presenting are like, hey, like, what's the point, right? But then if
Exactly.
you're almost giving them, let's say, I'm going to use an analogy of my dog, right? I can open the backyard for her. She can go run freely, but there's still a fence for her to, let's say, operate within, just in regards to, hey, go play with the ball here, do whatever you like, but you can kind of stay within this fence by presenting that idea, if that makes sense. So that like giving them the room to run, I think, is
Exactly.
probably the best way to say it,
Exactly.
rather than going around it like that. but no, that makes a ton of sense. And then I guess building on that too, one of the things I guess we kind of touched on throughout the whole podcast is just how much marketing has evolved in the last 10 years with social media, so on and so forth. I don't know if you can share this or you'd want to touch on this, but where do you see things going in 2024, and what types of areas are you focusing your time on? Is it, maybe short form? I think that was something that was big in the last couple of years. Are there other avenues that you're looking to strike within? I'm just curious about your thoughts within those elements of marketing.
And before I answer that question, I want to include something that you mentioned before about where I'm able to let my creative energy flow.
Yeah, for sure.
And although it's not necessarily like campaigns or projects like it used to be, the place where I get it the most now is from the innovation space. And that's being able to innovate our menu, trying new things, seeing new things, seeing new presentations, and being able to add them in our menu for people to be able to try and come back for and crave. So that's luckily where I still have a lot of creative latitude in that space.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I can only imagine too, where I know sometimes even when I first even moved out of accounting to marketing, right? I would be attending, I wanted to get into sports marketing, and I'd be attending a Senators game, and they were horrible at the time. Some may say they still are at the moment, but there'd be no people in the stands, and I would just be on my phone writing all these different ideas that I would have, because you'd almost be living these different experiences, and hey, how could I apply this to what I'm doing myself? So that's very cool that you do that, and how it definitely comes about. And I'm sure with food too, right? Eating 3 times a day and the different snacks you may have as well, what types of ideas that come about, especially with the great content for food as well.
Yeah, and we're lucky enough, or I'm lucky enough to be able
Yeah.
to do research and development trips, R&D trips.
Nice.
I certainly do it with our chefs. So, for example, next Friday, we're actually going to South Beach, Miami, where there's a food festival, and we're going to see what's up there. We're going to try some restaurants. We recently went to Charlotte, North Carolina back in October, which, believe it or not, had some really great ideas that we were able to take, and of course, kind of make them Bâton Rouge, if you will. But yeah, no, I've been lucky enough to be able to travel to so many places, and with the intention to just sort of like eat and gather ideas. And truthfully, that's a big dream part of my job.
Yeah, I could only imagine. I know even, let's say, I think 2 episodes ago, we had director of business development for a distillery here in Ottawa, and he was just mentioning how he loves just whiskey as well. And he's like, on Friday, he's like, I just tried all these different types of whiskeys. He's like, that was my job for the day. He was like, it was amazing. And I'm sure those trips are just as good as that as well. So that's pretty amazing. And I guess going back to that question I asked, because I know you wanted to chime in on that creative element. Are there any areas that you're looking out for in 2024 in regards to, hey, like this is something I'd like to try, or this is maybe an area we should put a lot of our focus within for marketing within the coming years?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So every year I always try to not do what I did the year prior. I find this is something where a lot of marketers, especially those who have been doing marketing for a long time, they kind of get like swallowed into this, because I mean, not only does it make work easy, but if you have something that succeeds, like why wouldn't you do it again? So I always try to be very mindful of that, because I felt that was something that I would see a lot also with my predecessors, or I even see it within other food brands and restaurant brands, that they just keep repeating the same thing over and over. And not only does that make like my job dull, but it also at a point runs out, and like you stop attracting the customers or the guests that you want to attract. So it's a very important part for us to try new things. 2024, it's going to be a little bit similar to what we did in 2023 with a few different elements. We obviously invest a lot in digital marketing. We invest a lot in Facebook. We invest a lot in Google. Sometimes I feel like we invest too much, but it's where our people are. It's where eyeballs are. People are on their phones constantly, and like you got to be where they are. And we also have to be where our target demographic is, and that's really where they live for many hours a day. And of course, Instagram as well. What we're trying new this year, we have someone new on the team. She started back in September, and she's doing a really good job at using LinkedIn as a little bit of the behind the scenes of what's happening at Bâton Rouge sort of head office with our franchisees. Like, what are we doing? Like, so we'll do a behind the scenes of, let's say, a photo shoot, or we'll do a behind the scenes of what does it look like when we go visit a location, when we meet with a franchisee, when we come up with a marketing plan. So we're focusing a little bit of like the behind the scenes. Another thing that we're doing differently is typically the Bâton Rouge marketing, our food shots are very gloss. They're very perfect. They're shot in a professional studio with like the perfect lighting, the perfect presentation, the perfect colors. We're actually trying to be a little bit more real. We're trying to be a little bit more unbuttoned, and we're trying to, showcase a little bit more of what the real restaurant experience is. And that's not to say that it's not beautiful presentation or beautiful colors of food or a medley of different plates and stuff. It just means that it's a little bit less quote unquote photoshopped, a little bit less scripted and more real. And I think that's something that people are really looking for. They're looking for it in other people, but they're also looking for it in brands. So we're trying to deliver on a little bit of that more real experience, hence why we're also incorporating the behind the scenes vlogs that we've been doing on LinkedIn. We're also, of course, mixing what we do for marketing with a little bit of traditional marketing. So, for example, like a TV ad, we're redoing a TV ad. We're changing up how that is being shot, from which perspective. And then, of course, we're balancing out with a lot of digital because, like I said, that's where our audience lives. We're also looking at doing some stunts for the brand, some activations. So I guess that also ties into what I was saying about just being a little bit more real, a little bit more unbuttoned. The stunt component comes into that as well. We're sort of brainstorming that. But in a nutshell, I think that's what I have for you for 2024.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. It sounds like there's a lot on the agenda, and it definitely sounds the aspect of that authenticity, like what it's really like to be at the restaurant, or even just almost investing into the process of what goes into that experience that you have behind the scenes, right? I think that's a cool element. I've always loved seeing things like that, so that I'm definitely gonna look out for that. For stunts, what do you mean, like stunts that you'd see in the movies? Or I guess I don't know if you can share that, but it sounds
Well,
pretty cool.
like, we're not looking at doing like daredevil stunts.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
wouldn't risk anyone's life for that.
yeah.
But like stunts, like, I don't know, example, like, I don't know, maybe a bonfire, or
Oh,
our brand plays a lot on the flame imagery, fire. We are a grill house after all, so that fire flame element is a big part of our brand. So we try to find interesting ways of incorporating that safely, of course. So that's what I mean by stunt. But we'll be maybe working with some professionals who can help us execute like a really fun stunt for the brand.
yeah, that makes much more sense, and I'm sure there's some cool things that you can do with that. But yeah, no, that's amazing. And I guess before we conclude the podcast, the way I like to wrap up every episode with each guest is ask two questions. So I've done this for, I think, 158 episodes is what this one is. And I've said 158 times, I'm going to live until I'm 103. I'm going to be on a rocking chair thinking about all the things I've done. So if I put you in the same scenario, 103-year-old Maria, you're on a rocking chair thinking about everything you've done in your career so far, what's maybe one story that will stand out to you that at 103 you're still going to remember that and be like, wow, that was a very cool moment?
Wow, that's really putting me on the spot. I don't think I've ever thought of myself as 103 on a rocking chair.
Yeah,
But do you mean a story within a work
yeah,
perspective?
like for work, like your career, is there, let's say maybe, I know sometimes people refer back to maybe something that happened recently from a success, or maybe like their biggest rejection, or even like their first day on the job, or even just like something that would happen in between that'd be like, whoa, like I never expected to run into Will Ferrell in the restaurant when we were doing a shoot, like stuff like that.
Um, I don't know. I feel like maybe my story hasn't happened yet,
Yeah, that's fair.
or
That's a good
maybe
one.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just jaded. Maybe it's not coming to me right now. But I have this feeling that my story hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, no, that I love that. Maybe we'll have to check in sometime to
Yeah.
hear what comes about. But no, that's a good answer. And the last question I then have is, let's say you're 103, you're on that rocking chair. We'll hop in a time machine. We'll go to when you were 16, 18, when you're about to step on to the university campus for the first time, right? When you're doing your undergrad. If you could speak to your younger version or your younger self today, what's maybe one thing that you've learned to date so far? Like, hey, like younger Maria, this is something that you should know.
Um, I think about that often. I think about, because I mean, I did, like I mentioned, I did my major in history, minor in poli sci. Not that it wasn't interesting, and not that it didn't give me, like a few skills, like writing skills, communication skills, for what I do today. But I've always wondered if, like, would I have been better off going into marketing from the very beginning? But then I don't know, I have this weird feeling that had I studied marketing from the very beginning, I feel like I wouldn't have fallen in love with it like I did sort of throughout my journey. But I think something to remember is, when I was in university at McGill, one regret I have is that I felt I didn't spend enough time on campus, connecting with other students, whether they were doing the same major I was doing or doing something completely different. Felt like I was always in a rush to leave. I think a big part of that is because I didn't really have any friends from high school or CEGEP. We have CEGEP here in Quebec that came to McGill and continued the the educational path that I was on. So I felt like I always had this urge to just like leave and go hang out with them or meet them closer to Concordia because that's where everybody was. And I feel like I could have benefited a lot by sticking on campus, maybe being more involved in different committees, maybe different clubs, just maybe forging more solid connections with other people in McGill. Because at the end of the day, I think university obviously, gives you a great educational base in whichever field you decide to go in. But I really think it's the connections along the way that you make with either friends, professors, whomever, that can dictate your future, dictate your career, and play a very pivotal role in the career path that you end up on or that you end up changing midway or whichever. So I think that's something that I look back and I'm a little bit regretful.
Yeah, and to be honest, I can relate to that completely. Where I went to CEGEP as well, an English CEGEP in Gatineau here, and I stayed in Ottawa, Gatineau for university as well. So I had my elementary, my high school, my CEGEP friends still, and because I think what you skip the first year of university or you get credits for it. You're 18. You're like, oh, like I've done that stuff already. I'm not gonna go do Frosh Week or the different things like that. And I definitely feel the same way where I feel like I missed out on it too. And even just in regards to what you're saying, maybe if you did marketing first, I kind of have thought that too. Hey, maybe if I didn't do accounting initially, did co-ops, I would have met people, etc. So yeah, I can definitely relate to that, and I think that's the perfect way to end the podcast, where I'm sure it just kind of brings everything together, and I think a lot of people can relate to the different advice or thoughts that people have at the end. But yeah, unless there's anything else you'd like to share, I really appreciate you coming on.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that said, that's it for episode 158. Tune in for next week's episode. Thank you.